Live. My name is Denny Doherty, and I'm joined today by Ashley Vanderpool from my office. Say hello, Ashley, if you want.
Hello. Thanks for having me today.
Now, thank you for joining me today, Ashley. I really appreciate it. I think our topic today is going to be very important to a number of people. We're going to be talking about video conferencing etiquette tips. And on one hand, I was a little bit torn about doing this because on one hand, it's not the start of the pandemic. This isn't brand new. All of us should know a little bit about video conferencing, maybe more than we did 10 or 11 months ago. It was funny because when I had started looking for some resources on this topic, a lot of the articles were actually dated like March 2020, April 2020, back when this just positively exploded. So on one hand, I was a little bit leery of doing it and thought, I hope I'm not late to the shindig. I hope I'm not behind the times. On the other hand, the flip side of looking at this is we've had 11 months to become proficient at this, and yet there are still some problems that people exhibit while video conferencing. It's not new. It's not. It's kind of like the text message in a way. When they're brand new, they're great, but as they've evolved, there's been some text message etiquette and things like that, much like email, much like any other technology. So we're not still in the early days of the pandemic where many of us had not used this technology, at least on a regular basis. We're well into this, almost a year into this. So I think it's fair to say there's going to be more expectations when you do use it. Ashley, do you feel that's a fair assessment all around?
Yeah, I would also mention that, and I'm glad that you mentioned the text messages and emails. When things are new, sometimes we show more professionalism and then we become more comfortable with technology or different resources. And then those kind of we start slacking a little bit. I remember the first time that I sent an email, and I know some students were probably thinking I've been sending emails since I was a kid. Well, that wasn't my case when I was growing up. So my first email, I probably spent 5 or 10 minutes just reading over it and making sure I had my commas and periods in the correct place. Words were capitalized, and it made me nervous to send it. I would read over it several times. And now sending an email, we can throw in some emojis at the end or text message language in our emails. So as we become more comfortable with things, it's just so easy to slack on some of those etiquettes that we learned when we first started it.
It really is. I think sometimes we start out professional. I think I caught myself being like this a little bit last year. You start off with the utmost professionalism, but then you see someone else do something and you wonder, is it actually okay to do that? Or even if it's not okay, it's like, well, is the bar really that low? How much? I think it's human nature. How much can I get away with? I hate to admit it, but if we're going to be honest with one another, we've all probably wondered at a time or two, how far can I push this? How much can I get away with? That being said, I think with a number of things in life, including but not limited to virtual meetings, that can be a very slippery slope, and you want to make sure that your professionalism is at an all-time high if possible, particularly when an online meeting, when it involves something pertaining to the workplace, whether maybe even a job interview. Because as we go through this, I've got a couple stories from job interviews this past week, like interviewed some GA candidates and things like that from this past year. And even if it's not an interview, even if it's just meeting with a boss, I mean, you want to think about how you are taken. And there's a way to do it very professionally, and there's a way to do it very poorly. So we're gonna talk about that. And I think we've probably done a pretty good job of prefacing this. I want to go ahead and jump in. And the article, of course, I sent Ashley some articles. I might include the hyperlinks when we post this to YouTube as well. That way, if you're watching this and you want to have additional reading, that you can do that. But tip number one that I had found was just make sure everything works. And on one hand, I feel like that shouldn't be on the list. That should be a given. But that being said, the other day I actually went to go talk to someone, and for whatever reason my camera wouldn't work, and clearly it's working fine today. I'm on the same machine. I don't know what happened. So there's always that anomaly that can exist, but at the very minimum, doing your best to make sure your equipment works. So do you have any ideas on that, Ashley, or any feedback? Or?
Yeah, so there was actually a particular moment that I'm recalling back from over the summer when this was still somewhat new. I was about to conduct a mock interview with a student, and I go to click on, I believe it was Zoom was the application that we were using, and I had a notice pop up that I had to update it before I could utilize it. Oh. Had I not clicked on that at least 5 or 10 minutes in advance, I would have been late for that meeting. So that's just one of those tips. Make sure not only everything's working, that you're getting on a few minutes early just to make sure you don't have to update something or anything along those nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly when something is when something's of the utmost importance, and that's a tip we've always given the students about. We'll say a job interview is be about 10 minutes early, and number one, it communicates respect, but also you want to have that margin of error just in case something happens. You don't want to be on the way physically to a job interview, and that's the day that someone decides to drive 10 miles under the speed limit in front of you, or you get a flat tire, or there's a car crash and you have to go the long way, and just anything can happen. So that margin of error, and when you're traveling to a meeting physically, can be very important. But as this goes to show, even if it's a virtual meeting, you're not off the hook. Something I think I shared this example in another one of these calls, or another one of these meetings that we've done, is I know my internet sometimes goes out at my house, and I live in Huntington. I pay an ungodly amount of money for Xfinity, so it's not like I have Joe Schmo backwoods internet or something. I have Xfinity, and it's highway robbery, and I will go on camera and say that until I'm blue in the face. But so I've got decent internet, but my router will disconnect at the worst times. And I know you probably remember that during our staff meetings, there was one day where I think I just barely got reconnected and it kicked me off again. So something that my somewhat techier than I am brother had taught me is, if you have something very important coming up, go ahead and unplug and replug in the router. That way it's a little bit more fresh. I guess that's an okay way to explain it. I'm not a super tech person, but little tips like that can help reduce the risk of being cut off during something that's very important. So, and particularly if you know, for instance, that you may have a problematic router and then you didn't do it, then some of that falls back on you, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes just having a backup plan. Okay. For some reason my internet system does go down on my computer. What am I going to do? Do I have a phone beside me that I can use a hotspot and reroute that? So just kind of have a backup plan just in case.
Yeah, definitely. There was a thing I participated in back in September. It was April Fugit Fuller from the Center for Teaching and Learning. It was Adjunct Super Saturday, and she was talking about teaching her online classes. And I think she had said that she had her phone nearby, and I don't know what her exact method was, but she said if it cut out when she was teaching, within 2 minutes she'd be back online. And she even told her students, "You give me 2 minutes," or something like that. Maybe it's 2 or 3 minutes, but she was ready to go. And I think she said start the 120-second 2-minute countdown if she went off, because she would be back. And I love how much thought and preparation she put into that. So furthermore, number 2 on the list was just being organized, and I think that's very important as well for a virtual meeting. And some of this, it's not so much the platform or the channel with which we meet, but I think the location of where are we during those meetings. Because, for instance, I feel right now, I mean, I'm dressed for work, I'm in my work office, and I feel like there's a level of professionalism I'm going to bring to anything I do here. Now, however, if I were at home today, maybe not dressed as nicely as I am now on the same couch where I watch Netflix, it's just easier to be unprofessional. It's easier to be more in a relaxation mode versus a work mode. And as you know, Ashley, I hate working from home. I am in here anytime I can get in the building for those reasons. So I think particularly if we're not this can happen in our offices too, but particularly if we're not in a traditional workspace, it can be harder to get organized. So taking the effort to actually be organized and be ready for something is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. It also just makes you feel better. If I'm laying in bed and like trying to do work, it's harder for me to like get motivated. When if I'm like in my office at home or even at work, it's just easier to get motivated if you're in a professional setting.
It is for sure. My philosophy is beds are for sleeping. They're great. They're just for sleeping, but there's other pieces of furniture that are better for meetings. That being said, I've met with students. I know they might live in a crowded house or something, and they're best to get away from noise. The best thing they can do is go sit on their bed, and I understand that. But even if you're banished to your bedroom for a meeting, maybe at least sit up. You don't necessarily have to be laying. At least replicate professionalism as much as humanly possible, even if your circumstances aren't ideal as far as where you have to go for the meeting. So, and also we want to talk about, speaking of professionalism, talk about being screen ready. And there's funny commercial. I saw a commercial again about this the other day. The guy like sneezes, he drops the laptop, and you see him, he's like in the polka dot boxers. You may or may not have seen that commercial, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but if people are going to be seeing you, particularly in a professional type setting, you want to think about how do you look on camera. And again, it's easier. I'll be No, I don't want to say I pick my nose, but I've been tempted. I don't pick my nose, but even like right now, if I go to scratch my nose, I might say, how's that going to look? I hope I don't have that appearance. And because if I were in a meeting right now and we were around like a round table in a room, I'd be a lot more cognizant of that. But if you're seeing like things on camera, but you're alone, like physically alone in the room, it's very easy to let your guard down. Very easy to let your guard down. And don't take away from this. I pick my nose. I swear I don't. But I'm also aware that anything I do, I don't even want to give the appearance of doing that. So being screen ready, camera ready, it can mean a number of things. I think it's our physical appearance too. I mean, if I have a 9:30 meeting, I'm not going to roll out of bed at 9:22 and stumble into the kitchen, pour a cup of coffee, and go sit down looking like I rolled out of bed because I clearly will look like I just rolled out of bed. There's at least what you can see in me, I want to be as professional as possible. I would argue go all the way and dress, but if you're not going to do that, at least what can be seen on the screen, have it be as professional as possible.
Yeah, and it's one of those old sayings, look good, feel good. That's kind of the same whether you're in an interview or you're in a meeting. If you're dressed professionally, it's just something, it just gives you more confidence, and it gives you that confidence booster to kind of do your best throughout the session.
It really does. And there was a guy I used to work for when I was substitute teaching. He's actually the current administrator of my old high school. And one thing he had always told me is that clothing reminds us of what we're there to do. I ran into him over at the Huntington Mall, actually. It was on a Friday night. He was still there in his shirt and tie, just looked like he was going to a meeting at the school. And I always knew him to be a pretty good dresser, but he just looked like he was a day at work. And I was getting ready to sub for him, and it came up. I think I mentioned, oh, you didn't, because I've had jobs where I've had to wear a tie before, and usually I'm not even to the car, and I'm like yanking that thing off, and because I just think ties are the devil, they're the worst. But he looked as presentable as ever, just there at the mall, looking like he was at the office, and that's what he told us. He told me, he reminded me, clothing does remind you of what you're there to do. It puts you in the mindset for that. So I think that's another good argument against the let me wear my pajama bottoms during my work meetings. I mean, you can maybe by with it for a little while, but if you take it more seriously and dress the part the entire way, I think it's just that much more reinforcement, and it'll help you to do what you're there to do.
I really like his saying. I may steal that for the future.
It's not mine. I feel like I've used it. I feel like I should pay him royalties. I mean, we can send him royalties. So. So also number 4 here, we have check your background, and there's interesting things you can do with your background. You can blur it, you can put on fake backgrounds, but you do want to be aware of what is there. And I mean, like behind me right now, you see my office. I have my overhead light off. I mean, there are probably things I could do to make it a little bit better if I wanted to. I know I've got light coming in from this one window. It's not the worst. It's probably not even the most ideal, but you want to be aware of what people are looking at. And I would say at minimum, avoid anything profane, vulgar. And the reason I'm saying that is if you're a student, I mean, I don't know what's on your walls in your room. If you have a maybe not PG rated poster in your room, you don't necessarily want that behind you if you're doing an interview for a professional internship. So you want to be thinking about what does the person see, because they will see more than simply your talking face on a meeting. So you want to be aware of that background, and you can even blur background. There's a number of options. I played with them. I was tempted to do it right now. I don't want to go too far off. I don't want to go too far off task or get too crazy with that. Let's see. Hannah, I believe you said you have your hand up.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, but I am the girl that had the cat with the cat as the judge painting in the background. And we had a meeting, and my cat judge painting was in the background, and you were like, I never do this, but I just want to know the story. And
yeah, okay, I remember. Okay, yeah. Okay. The cat judge. Yeah.
Is the cat judge a little too inappropriate for a meeting?
Well, and the thing is, too, I think when we talk about inappropriate, I think it's a sliding scale. Something may not be inappropriate, but something could possibly be distracting, even if it's perfectly appropriate. Like the cat judge, from what I recall, I think it's something that if I were to hang at my work office, I wouldn't be ashamed for my boss or even President Gilbert to come in my office. But you have to ask yourself, and I'm not explicitly saying that it is, but you should take an inventory of everything in your background and ask, is this something that's going to be distracting for the people who are, is it going to take away from my presence in this meeting?
Okay.
So, yeah, I do remember the cat. Yeah, because I remember saying something about that now. And I think for me, it was just more out of curiosity than anything. From what I recall, I don't think it was inappropriate. I think it was catching my attention a little bit. But in the interest of full disclosure, I'm very easily distracted. So I don't know if I'm the greatest example for this, but I'm like, I just got to know. Tell me about this. So if you do have a lot of things in your background, that is the risk you run. And if it's, because I forget why we were meeting. I think it was something we just kind of had a laugh about it and moved on. If it's a really professional meeting, you do want to watch for anything that could possibly be a distraction. Yeah, absolutely. And that was a very good thing to bring up. Even if it's not truly inappropriate, it might just, you want to be careful of what takes the focus off of you. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
I am also someone that gets very easily distracted. So if it was in just a meeting and I'm not really sure what a cat judge photo is, I'm very intrigued now. So I may want a picture of that later after this. But however, I'm someone that gets distracted. So if it's just a meeting, that's one thing. If it was an interview, I would probably steer clear from that just because you don't want it to take away from what you're saying. I was a part of a mock interview last semester and a student just had her birthday balloons in the background. And as the fan blew, they were kind of just swaying back and forth. Not appropriate by any means. But halfway through her response to this question, I actually had to have her repeat the response because I was staring at the balloon swaying in the background. So just be cautious of that. You want to be remembered for your skills and your interview versus what's in your background.
Don't be the balloon girl. No, the birthday balloon girl. And I think you touched on something really good at that too, Ashley. You don't want to just assume. Here's the thing: if someone's interviewing you for a job, and yeah, they might be a manager of something or whatever, but they're human beings too, and they can be just as easily distracted as you or me. They're not always these godlike figures that have no flaws. I mean, they can be just as easily distracted as the next person, and a lot of the things that we do might be a distraction to them. So I think it's easy when you're interviewing to think that, oh my goodness, I'm the nervous one. They've got their act together. I'm the hot mess. But your interviewer might be a hot mess too. You never know. I mean, it's possible. So good, really good discussion on that. Yeah, that's why I love in this. I love when we can discuss. So I encourage more discussion, more contributions as we go here. I'm gonna kind of, let me see here. Yeah, I want to kind of combine number 5 and number 6. I think we can do that. I'm keeping time in mind as well. It's speak clearly and look at the camera, because I think both of them have to do with your communication as far as the meeting goes. So speaking clearly, because I think we can lose things in translation, so to say, over digital means. I think it's important to speak slowly, enunciate your words, speak it aloud. I don't think you actually have to shout at it, but speak loud enough to be heard. That one thing a lot of times I do when I start a meeting is I ask someone, hey, Ashley, can you hear me right now? And if she were to say no, I would say, well, think at least there might be something on my part that I need to change. Do I need to, is my microphone, is it compromised somehow? Is it turn? Because I used to have an external mic I would use. Maybe it's off. Is there something causing noise? Am I just not speaking loudly? I kind of do it as a test run before we get things off the ground. So you want to be sure to speak clearly in the meeting. And it kind of leads us into number 6, looking at the camera, because, and the reason I'd make that argument is part of speaking clearly, I think, could involve making sure they can see your face and see your lips move. And that can be important during a virtual meeting, because maybe the sound cuts in and out. I can't tell you in the last year how many times the sound has cut in and out. It's kind of that it's kind of what you hear, and sometimes it freezes, but sometimes the sound's going out that I've still managed to see their lips. And we're in a situation right now with virtual meetings. I need as much information as I can get. And I think looking at the camera can really help with that. But in addition, I'm a 2-time communication major. I'm big on eye contact, and it's really hard to make true eye contact with someone with these virtual means. So the camera is like right now, it's like right here, my camera is looking at me. So me looking at that camera when I'm talking is is about as good as I can do. I mean, I could look right here at Ashley or look at any one of you or any number of things in my office. But if I were like this right now, presenting and looking down, I mean, I'm looking at my notes right now. You probably don't feel like I'm speaking with you as much as if I were to look at the camera and speak at you like this or speak with you like this. So like I said, again, I'm big on eye contact. It can be difficult these days. Looking at the camera is one of the better things that we can do.
It also just helps show that you're being engaged. Be cautious of some of those nonverbal cues. Some of those nonverbal communications. We want to make sure that we're sitting up straight, not slouching. We want to show that we're interested. We want to show that we're paying attention. And although we can't necessarily make eye contact through the video, we can at least look at the camera and show that we're engaged throughout the process.
Definitely, that's a great thing to mention, Ashley, because as a listener, you want to think about that too. As a listener, it's very easy to sit here and kind of like if I were in the middle of a meeting, and how engaged do I look as I'm doing this? Not as engaged. So it's a way to show that you're being an active participant. And again, I'm a huge face-to-face person. I love face-to-face. We've done things digitally the last almost year for reasons we're all very well aware of. But I think you tend to lose something with that. So trying to look at the camera and do as much as you can to try to at least replicate eye contact, just to help build engagement. It's a way to get the most out of the call, whether it's a simple work meeting, whether it's an interview, or whatever the case might be. So, which also leads us nicely to our next point, trying to connect on a personal level. And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but just keeping in mind that it is digital technology, and not only is it the digital component in and of itself, but when you look at it in the context of our lives, is anyone here listening to me today just not totally sick of virtual Teams calls? I'm over them. I think they're great. I'm happy we have them, but at the same time, I'm so ready to go back to face-to-face. If I never do another Teams call again the rest of my life, I think I will be okay with that. If anyone has any feedback on that or feels differently, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to agree with me, that's fine too. But yeah, I'm just curious to hear some other people's thoughts on that. I'm over it. So if anyone has any thoughts, but it also furthermore points to the fact that we're tired of this. We're over it. It's not new and exciting anymore, but we have to try to continue to connect on a personal level as well.
Yeah, I've probably asked, 100 students already this semester if they prefer virtual meetings or virtual interviews. And of those 100, I've actually only had one student tell me that she preferred it. And her reasoning was she didn't have to wake up as early and walk across campus. That was the only positive that she brought out of virtual meetings. But most students that I spoke with, and maybe some of those that are on here today could agree or disagree with me, but most students that I spoke with said they are much ready for having in-person sessions again.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, because I feel like there was an assumption made on my part and many other people who work at a university, work in higher ed, the students are all about being on devices and being on screens. Because I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've walked across campus and someone is like this in their phone and they just about walk into me. And and again, I don't want to sound like an old cranky old man, and I'm probably stereotyping, but I think we look at that and we just assume that's where people are, but that's where they are comfortable and that's where they want to be. But I've had very similar experiences as Ashley. I'm amazed how many students have told me I'm tired of digital. I just want face-to-face, and it's kind of cool in a way, because for me it just kind of gives me a little bit of hope that maybe people like younger people want to crave this and they want to actually engage people face-to-face. It's not going to be a lost art, because being a communication guy, it's kind of sad to me to think that face-to-face might be a lost art one day. I hope it's not. So, all righty, moving right along. If no one has any thoughts, moving right along. This one is fairly obvious, but find a quiet place if you can, or find the quietest place with the fewest distractions that you can. Now, about 10 minutes before we started this meeting today, I think I don't know if they were getting trash or what, but it sounded like a truck was picking up and slamming a dumpster right outside of my window. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Of all times and of all days, must we? So sometimes we're going to be very limited, and I know the building we're in, it's not going to keep a lot of noise out, and trying to, so I was like, I just hope it stops, and it did stop. So Some people, furthermore, are working from home, attending school at home, their family members, pets, and who knows how many other distractions you have to take into account as well. But finding the quietest place that you can to try to eliminate those distractions. And again, I like to be careful because I live by myself. I have a house at my disposal, so I have my choice of rooms. I know not everyone necessarily has that luxury, so I do approach this topic knowing that. But also the quietest place you can find, the better.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I do not have that luxury of having a house to myself, so I will live through you on that experience. However, for me, we did a lot of virtual meetings last year for our office, and there were days because we were doing different projects at the house, so there was construction going on inside my house. I have a child, I have a dog, all those great things inside. So some days was actually quieter for me to go outside versus inside because there was just so much stuff going on inside my house and I couldn't find a quiet place. If that is you at any point, it is okay to find a quiet area in another location. There was a few meetings I had to actually go outside. I picked a plain brick wall for my background and I just muted myself and I wasn't talking. However, I did notice that I have birds outside my house. I thought they sounded very quiet and they wouldn't be distracting. And a few people actually pointed them out. Oh, you have birds chirping behind you. So just because we think things sound quiet on our end, it actually might sound a little louder on the other individual's end. But that being said, if it was an interview, I would have found a different location. So kind of be thinking about what kind of meeting this is. Is it a professional meeting that you need to have another location? Is it an interview where you need to find a quiet location indoors? Maybe you need to find a spot on campus to do that at. So just think about what type of meeting that you're conducting, and if you do need to find a place inside in a different location.
I think it's wonderful advice. It also kind of underscores the importance of thinking ahead and planning ahead. There was a student, he was a nursing student. This is when I still had my house in Gallipolis. I didn't even work at Marshall at this point, so this was a while back. And there was a family he was staying with, and I love them to death. They're great. They're still great friends of mine. They're like family to me. But I know they had a couple kids of their own, very active household. And he was studying for nursing boards, and he said, I can't do this. Then he's like, I come study at your house. He actually came and went into my little bedroom study. It was a bedroom set aside as a study at my Gallipolis house, and he went in there, and I was happy to loan him that room for a while he studied for nursing boards. And I guarantee you, if you need a quieter place, if you think about people you know, whether friends, family members, maybe people who don't have children, don't have a lot of pets, it might be good candidates for this. There's also places, for instance, over in Dranko, you may be able to use as well. And I think there's more out there than you might realize. But again, if you're doing an interview and you're having like a hard time finding a quiet place, you may want to think about that before the day of the interview. If you have a 1 o'clock interview, don't be 11 or 11:30 trying to find a quiet place. If you know you have an interview next week, you may want to start on that now and think about where can I go to do this? Because like Ashley said, particularly if it's an interview, you don't want to give any inkling to someone that you might not be a great candidate for the job. If you interview somewhere that's noisy, what if they're still working remotely, or what if it's a partially working remotely position? Or they might be thinking, okay, is it going to sound like this every time they talk to one of my clients? And employers might ask themselves questions like that. So part of what you want to do is be thinking, and I don't want to sound like I'm scrutinizing too much or being too nitpicky, but there's that, but there's also beginning to think about these things like an employer. And employers might ask themselves, and in some cases they might ask you these tough questions. So being prepared and kind of getting in their head and thinking like an employer is pretty important.
Yeah, and if you're someone that lives on campus and you do have a roommate, and you get a phone call for an interview in a week, like Denny said, go ahead and call the library and set up a space that's quiet. That way, even if you tell your roommate in advance that you have an interview, you don't want to take that caution. So just go ahead and do that in advance, just in case.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot can change in a week. What if your roommate gets sick or something like that? They can't leave the room, and then you don't want in your background while you're doing an interview. Especially you don't want unexplained coughs in 2020, 2021. So
Yeah.
so
I had an interview with a student and their roommate ran back and forth 2 different occasions in the interview. And I'm like, is everything okay? Even if they're quiet, sometimes just walking back and forth behind your screen, just kind of be cautious of that as well.
Mm-hmm. I think they call that creepers, like people who are in the background. And there's a really funny, I might have mentioned it again in a previous Career Ed Live session. There was a guy somewhere, I think his wife was working from home. He like dressed up as Batman and sat at the kitchen table, just kind of like staring at the camera. And which I think that's funny. I mean, my hat's off to the guy for that as a joke, but I think he had his fun with it and then they stopped. But seriously, you want to think about how are things like that going to look, and it might be, if it's a low stakes meeting with their immediate team, it might be kind of funny to do. But you don't want, on a serious note, you don't want lurkers in your background, because that just, who's that person, it's just a can of worms that's easier not to open. And while we're talking about noise, number 9, using the mute button. And I'm not as good about this as I could be. Ashley, I see you're muted right now, so you're doing a great job using the mute button. So just anytime you're not talking, not only because of picking up background noise, but also feedback. I've been on a number of calls, particularly if there's a high number of people, which we're going to talk about attendees here in a few points. If you're on a call with a lot of people, sometimes there can be feedback, or if someone has, I don't know if they have too many windows open or what can cause it. Again, I'm not a tech or audio genius, but that can help with feedback if when you're not talking, if you actually mute yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that just echoed there. Okay. I've had situations where I forget to turn my phone off, or so just be thinking about that in advance. Go ahead and mute your phone. You don't want your phone to ring in the middle of an interview while you're answering a question. So just be cautious of all the noises that could potentially go on throughout that session.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I had a telephone phone. This is back in the days of regular interviews. When I was in college, I interviewed for a campus job, and my phone actually rang during the interview, and I still got the job, but I wouldn't count on that. I think the person hiring was the son of my advisor and department chair, so that may have played a role in it. So, because I was like, oh my God, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen during an interview. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And I apologize all over myself. And I should have had the thing on silent, but yeah, that I still got the job, but I don't bank on someone being that understanding. So let's see, pay attention when sharing your screen. This is at number 10. This is very important as well. If you're anything like me, I've got a number of projects that I work on a daily basis, and I have a lot of windows open on my computer. So oftentimes when I am, let me actually give you a very real life example. If I'm working with a student and I go to share, I talk to students a lot about BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, great place to go do career research. But in another window, I might have pulled up an academic record of another student I've been working with, everything including their address, their birth date, their GPA. So how bad would it be if I accidentally shared that screen with another student? I mean, that's a huge FERPA issue. That's a huge privacy issue. And it's one of those things where it's not to say it couldn't happen if I were physically meeting with students, but I think it's just a lot easier for stuff like that to slide in. So when it comes time, if you're thinking about sharing your screen, if you're in a meeting where you're going to be sharing your screen, my first advice would be to close any non-essential windows. Another piece of advice in this article is to, and I'm guilty of this myself, is to shut off either like your email, your Outlook, or shut off anything that's going to have things popping up. And because that's just another distraction as well. But I try to, especially if I'm going to be sharing with a student, I try to, and some, who knows, I might just be sitting here browsing stuff at lunch. And some of it's just, I don't want students to know everything in the world about me. Maybe I'm looking at a vacation spot or something at lunch, during my lunchtime, doing something that I think is acceptable, but still it might be unprofessional for a student to see that. So I try to close off any unessential windows prior to a student meeting, and just be very careful what I share with them. And I mean, because there's unprofessional, but then in the other example I shared, what if I was meeting with another student and say Ashley was a student I met with earlier today? What if I shared her date of birth and address and all that with another student? That would be, you'd probably be pretty upset with me, Ashley, wouldn't you, if you knew that happened?
Yeah, I think I would be.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned go ahead and close out of those other sections. So anytime I share my screen, I go ahead and make sure that I close out all other windows, because I am notorious for having like YouTube or some sort of music playing in the background. it's not that I'm just sitting here watching YouTube videos all day. So sometimes I just have music playing in the background. And if you do that, I would hate to accidentally click on a YouTube video while I was in the middle of a meeting with my boss or something. So just be cautious of your other screens that are open.
Absolutely. Now, personally, I think our boss would see the humor in it, but not all bosses are like that. I mean, some people are just very much down to business. So, what was it? The potato boss? We were teasing her about that. Remember the Zoom meeting, the potato boss?
Oh yeah.
So some people have more of a sense of humor than others, but definitely it's a time where I think you have to work. I think you have to work just that much harder to be professional during these times, because I think especially if you're not on site, it can be easier to let your guard down. So you want to do everything you can to be as professional as possible. So number 11 is limit the attendee list, which is probably not a bad rule of thumb for any meeting ever. But I think especially if it's virtual and you're not actually having to book a room and think about physical number of people in a room, physical room capacities, it can be easy to just put a whole lot of people on a call. And there's a lot of drawbacks with that, including perhaps a system lagging, perhaps that feedback I was just talking about. There's a whole lot of things that can happen. Not to mention it can just be disrespectful of people's time too. I think if you're just hurling meetings at them they don't need to be at, and I think with these virtual meetings it can be easier to do that. So I think a good rule of thumb is just to ask yourself, does this person really need to be at this meeting? Does this really involve them?
It also take away from the meeting, especially if you have like a chat feature set up. If there are several questions scrolling through the chat, and I've been in part of meetings that had over 100 participants, and there were so many questions that were loading in the chat that could have been an entire meeting itself. So sometimes having a smaller group, it's just easier to communicate with everyone and make sure everyone's questions are being answered.
It is, and I think even more if we're talking like physically in person, having too big of a meeting, that's the risk you run. I think it's just that much more easy to become invisible in a virtual meeting. Now, some people say the opposite of that, because it might pop up a notification when so and so enters, when so and so leaves, and I think that's fair. But by that same token, it's so easy to just turn off your mic, turn off your camera, be attending the meeting, but then be doing whatever else you want to, which we're going to talk about multitasking here in just a moment. But our next point actually is about using the message feature carefully. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that, Ashley. To give a perfectly good example, there were some presentations that we did during orientation that were virtual this past summer, and there were actually 2 chats. There was a chat where I was part of, I believe it's a parent session where parents could ask questions, but then there was also a private chat. There was just people who were at the university who were helping to participate and helping to run the meeting. So imagine if a parent said something snarky or I didn't like them and I wanted to make a snarky remark, and what if I had put that in the wrong spot? I mean, do you know how bad that would make me and the university look? Really, I mean, I would probably be begging someone to not fire me if I did that, because if you make the university look bad in front of that many people, I mean, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. You know, you better have a good reason ready, and you better be ready to fall on your sword, and hopefully never do that again. So, but even if it's not something that extreme, I think just with messages, if you do it too often, it can get lost. I mean, I've been a part of chats, kind of like Ashley was talking about too, meetings where people just chat and they message so fast the person cannot answer the questions. Because if we had even a large number of people for an in-person meeting, society norms and I think etiquette would dictate that I raise my hand, ask a question. Once that's answered, someone else raises their hand, asks a question, and so on and so forth. I think virtually so much can hit you so fast, it can be kind of difficult to necessarily stick with that. So be careful about that message feature. So, and also that leads us to our next point, number 13, don't multitask. It's very obvious. It's very obvious if I were multitasking, if I were talking to you and I decided to come over here and look at my email or start doing something else, people know what you're doing. I mean, if you're typing when you shouldn't be typing, if you're like kind of like look like you can tell if someone's engaged in a meeting or if they just kind of have you're just kind of pulled up and they're doing a lot of things in the background. It just again it sends a lot of negative messages. Perhaps if the meeting's not important, perhaps you're there out of a sense of obligation, you really don't care what's going on. It sends a lot of messages. None of them are good if you're multitasking during a meeting. Just much like I wouldn't go to a physical staff meeting and just sit on my phone the entire time. We all know that's a big no-no. We all know that'd be very frowned upon. I think sometimes when it's virtual, people might think they can get away with that rather. But it's amazing how much you can actually pick up from watching someone through a camera.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're someone that's participating in a meeting or maybe at the end of an interview, if you have some questions, it's almost a good thing sometimes to pick up a pen and piece of paper and take notes. I've been in several meetings before that I was demonstrating something to another individual. And as I was demonstrating, I could tell that they were not paying attention. They were staring straight, but they weren't taking notes. They weren't showing that they were actually participating. So just be cautious of that. If you're at a situation that you're supposed to be taking notes, make sure you're taking notes.
Definitely. And I mean, I don't know if you can tell this with 100% certainty, but you can also get a feel too. Is someone taking notes, or are they engaged or not? I remember one time I volunteered at a camp, and I'll never forget this though, because I felt bad because there was a kid that was on his phone, and I fussed at him, and he was taking notes, and he showed me, and I felt really bad. I was like, oh well, now I just feel like a jerk. So sometimes you can't tell, but a lot of times you can tell. So definitely.
Yeah, I'm cautious of taking notes on my phone just because it could look and appear as if you were searching something on social media or texting someone. So I would be cautious of the phone note taking.
I agree. I would, even if it's one of those things, even if you're not doing anything wrong, it's what do we associate phones with? You usually not work as much as we do social, talking, not being engaged in work, and that may not even be completely fair, but you might inadvertently be sending a signal that you don't mean to send.
And it's okay to ask other individuals that are on a meeting, hey, is it okay if I take notes right now? Just because when you're virtual, they can only see a square box of you. So if they can't see other things that you're doing, it's okay to just ask, hey, is it okay if I take notes?
Definitely. And I think not only will it explain what you're doing, but I think just the fact that you asked and that you showed that courtesy will just go that much further. So, and the last item I have here is it's actually entitled "Stay Put," and I was like, well, that's an interesting way to state it, but it's true. I mean, I've actually in the last week or so I've had a lot of just casual video chats with friends in the evening, and what I might do is I might decide, oh hey, I'm thirsty, I'm going to go get a drink in my kitchen and carry them through, and then they get the background tour of my house and all that. And if you're just kind of casually talking to someone, it still might annoy them. I don't know, but that's not a super formal circumstance. But you also you want to be careful about if I was attending a work meeting on my phone, which I think if that's what you're doing, I think that's fair, especially if that's what you have. But you don't want to forget that it's a professional meeting. You don't want to have it in your mind turn into, oh hey, I'm FaceTiming my friends, and then get really unprofessional with it either. You don't want to be walking all over the place and things are happening behind you and you're just about making people seasick. And similarly too, I'm going to add another one I had read is don't disappear from a camera without good reason, because most of us there's a level of professionalism when we attend a real meeting, but I've been guilty. I know when we did staff meetings, I was guilty of this. I'd get up and I'd go get a cup of coffee in my kitchen. You just see the blank background. I would just leave the camera. So I think there's better ways to handle that. You maybe want to turn a camera off. If it won't totally disrupt the flow of the meeting, it might be best just to excuse yourself, even if it's in a chat. Say be back in 2 minutes or something like that. That way, if we were having a virtual meeting and we were all at home and Ashley's like, what do you think of that, Denny, hello. And I had gone to go get coffee and it's in my kitchen and I'm just not sitting there. And it's kind of rude to do that. And again, you have to think about how much information does the person have, because even if we had a meeting physically in person in my department and I stepped out, people would notice I was gone. But during a virtual meeting, they might not. They might think, is this technology broken? Can he not hear me? What's going on? Denny, hello, are you there? So it's just yet another courtesy to show people.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying in the same room. And it's not always easy to do when you're at home. For me over the summer, again, I was home with a dog and a child. And there were several times I had to turn my camera off and mute myself because I was putting the dog in the other room really quick and I was carrying my laptop with me. So those situations do happen, unfortunately, especially if you're at home. So just be cautious of that. Mute yourself, turn your camera off. That way it shows you're still paying attention, but it's not so obvious that you're walking around.
Yeah, definitely. And you want to, I think you can probably sum just about everything that we said today up with you. You want to give as much attention, as much professionalism, as much of your best as you can to the meeting. And I think it gets exponentially harder if it's virtual, and especially if you're somewhere other than your workplace. But you still want to do everything you can to extend every professional courtesy and just to reflect, because everything you do does reflect on you, reflects on your department, it reflects on your workplace, and you want to be aware of that. Because if I do something obnoxious in a meeting, particularly if people outside of Marshall are involved, I don't just make me look bad. I think I make career education look bad. I think I can make Marshall University look bad. And honestly, Marshall pays me, so I don't want to make them look bad. Okay, there should be some kind of loyalty there. If they pay me for the job, there's some allegiance I should have. I should try to make them look good and not bad. So as far as our list, that's about it. I think we touched on, we combined a few, but we touched on about 14 things there. Again, like I said, we've actually got a couple minutes for Q&A or additional discussion if anyone wants to jump in with anything. But on one hand, using virtual meetings like Teams and like we've done for the last year, it's not new. But I think also because it's not new, there's more of an expectation of what you should have. It's not just a toy anymore. And we've been doing this for a while. So if you have meetings, maybe you have to attend meetings from home or something. If it's been 11 months, maybe an employer, they might expect that you have found a way to have, for instance, a quiet place to meet versus maybe a week after we all get sent home in the early days of the pandemic. So I think on one hand, it's not brand new, and you should kind of know what you're doing with it by now. So that's why, like I said, I was kind of back and forth on whether to do this topic, because if you go online and look for tips, there's no shortage of articles. And I hope it wasn't a case of beating a dead horse, as they say. But at the same time, I think it's important to think about our professionalism. And I don't know, I'm hoping within the next 6 months to a year, things might look more like normal, but I don't think this is necessarily going anywhere this week or next week. We're not out of the woods yet, so we do want to think about how we present ourselves. So does anyone have any ideas, thoughts, comments, questions, anything of that nature? Yeah, Hannah, go ahead.
So I am applying to be an RA for next year, and I just got an email that we are having a group interview in about like 2 weeks. It's on February 27th, and it's a behavioral style interview. Do you guys know what that is? Because I have never heard of that before. Don't know what to expect or how to prepare or anything.
Do
you want to take that one, Ashley, or do you want me to share my thoughts? Or
I'll take that one.
Okay.
So you're actually speaking with the correct people right now. So I'm glad that you participated in this meeting. What I would highly encourage you to do, and this is for any student, student, alumni, everyone can take a part of this resource and service that our office offers. So if you have an upcoming interview, schedule an appointment with someone in our office, and we can actually conduct a virtual mock interview with you, give you some tips, run over several different questions and several different behavioral interview questions that you could potentially see throughout the session.
Okay, let's see here. So someone had mentioned they have to head out. Yeah, Emily says she has to head out. Thank you for joining us, Emily. We really appreciate it. You might already be going, but I'll thank you anyway. Thank you for joining us. It was great to have you here today. Hopefully we'll see you back here next time. I'll go ahead and address a couple things on the question too. A group, because I think particularly you had mentioned a group interview, and they can be a little bit more nerve-wracking, because if it's what I'm thinking, I don't know if it's multiple people are going to be interviewing you, or if you'll actually be interviewed along with other people, because if it's the latter of the two, that adds yet another dynamic to it. I'm thinking they have a panel that interviews people, but they still do it individually. I might be wrong on that. If you have multiple interviewers, I would encourage you, don't let it get into your head, just because it can be intimidating to interview with one person. But if you see you're outnumbered, it can be just that much easier to kind of think, oh shoot, what did I get myself into? do. So again, just practice, just answer questions completely, show your confidence. Don't let multiple people get into your mind. And I think that holds true even if you're being interviewed alongside other people. It can be easy to get distracted or get to focus too much on other people, but you want to just be prepared. You want to look at the job description, be prepared with your answers, particularly to common questions. And Ashley is absolutely correct. A mock interview can help you do that, but just don't let other people get in your head. Just stick to what you know. Just show confidence, and if you do that, that's one of the best ways you can get through that. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, excellent question. Anybody else? Excuse me. Anybody else have anything? Alrighty, I'm guessing that we're in good shape. So I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today for Career Ed Live. Again, Career Ed Live is a monthly outreach from the Office of Career Education. Today, I think we talked about a number of great things to keep in mind during virtual meetings, including virtual interviews. We'll be doing another one of these next month, so I hope everyone will join us then. And thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great day.